Okay, so I'm doing this small night broadcast because I want to gather some thoughts around this project Damien Flood and I are developing towards an exhibition in October 2026 at Green and Red Gallery, Dublin, where Damien will have a solo exhibition, and then downstairs in the basement concrete space of Green and Red, a kind of ancillary space which Jerome O'Driscoll has been playing around with for the last year. Small Night Scene will be collaborating with Damien Flood, which will be composed of this idea of thinking through painting with respect to theory and what theory means today to the contemporary painter. The contemporary painter who is caught up in social media, painting's relationship with the image, as a digital image, and also the commodification of painting. Through this digitization, through this weirdly individualism and competitiveness in the marketplace of dissemination of painting through images. So it's all kind of, painting is kind of collapsed in on itself as an image. It was forecasted years and years ago by Jean Baudrillard in his theory of the simulacrum, and also this idea of the image or the representation of something through an image becoming more real than the thing itself it's representing. We can get tongue-tied up here. I feel like I am getting tongue-tied. But what this project is very much about is a kind of questioning of the conditions of painting today in its circulation as an image, and in the marketplace, where the art world is very much and always has been dependent on painting to sustain itself, sustain the marketplace. And painting has always been at the fulcrum of that. It's what makes discourse around painting so interesting, more so than actually the other arts, because it's so close to the real of the marketplace that painting itself questions its own existence in that and its own complicity in that marketplace, but also questions the market itself and other art forms in those relationships, and how they're all feeding off each other. So painting for me as a lapsed painter, someone who didn't just take up painting for a couple of years in art school, but who was committed to painting for almost 15 years and exhibited painting at some point. I've always been interested in painting as someone who stopped painting, and also as a critic. But what I suppose interests someone like me as a critic, and when you think of someone like Isabel Graw, who's made a career of the discourse of painting's relationship with the marketplace, and the whole Sternberg press production line. So about 2 weeks ago, I started rereading these publications. Sternberg Press, editor Daniel Berenbaum, and of course Isabel Graw. And these are kind of produced around 2007, 2008. It's interesting, actually. I think this was produced, this one here, Canvases and Careers Today, Criticism and Its Markets was published in 2007, just before the financial crash. And then I think this one came afterwards, Thinking Through Painting, Reflexivity and Agency Beyond the Canvas. So Sternberg Press, especially under the editorial helm of Isabel Graw, has produced really interesting discourse around painting, especially her relationship with people like Melanie Gilligan, who is an artist and art critic, but is very much has one foot in the financial markets. I think she studied finance, but also someone like Merlin Carpenter, who has kind of created a career out of being a painter, but a painter invested in institutional critique, which is a kind of reflexive position. Reflexivity is a really big term. It was a very big term when I was doing my MFA. This idea of being aware as a painter of your compliance and complicity with the art market. So there's a lot of these artists that are not just painters or sculptors or whatever. They are very much aware of the machinations and mechanisms of the art world and the context in which they're making work. And that's part of the work. And that's what has always interested me as both an artist, whether I was a painter, someone in making videos or films or sculpture or installation. I was always interested in the context in which the artwork was inhabiting, and how that created readings and misreadings, and that the artwork wasn't just a luxury object, something that you could possess aesthetically, but something that was more than that. It was more than its objecthood. So the project Damien Flood and I are developing is around this notion of unmade painting. That phrase itself comes from this book, actually. I have a few books here, actually, but this one here. Myself and Damien were discussing this project a few weeks ago on Zoom, and I brought up this work by Uriel Orlo, whom I met when I was part of EVA in 2014, and I met him in a pub, and he presented this work unMade film at EVA, and I actually wrote a review of it as well. I became really interested. It's very much resonant now with respect to the crisis in Gaza, because it is about that relationship between Israel and Palestine. And it was really interesting looking at that conflict through the eyes of an artist and how they were manifesting that through the work. And this is before art, this is 2014, so this is before art has been very much politically and socially motivated with respect to how institutions are disseminating and producing and selecting artists for their programs. But it was interesting how this film was unmade, in that it couldn't come to a kind of conclusion, as the crisis hasn't come to a conclusion for over 70 years. So this idea of unmade painting, and it's something that Damien just said, okay, let's call it unmade painting, because there's something about the act of painting. Um, there's always an unmaking. There's always, and it's that prefix on that's really important here. Um, I lecture in psychoanalysis and art at Trinity, and the phenomena, theoretical phenomena, posited by Sigmund Freud, the uncanny, in that paper from 2019, or not 2019, 1919, when Freud started to speculate on this feeling, this strange feeling around familiarity, all indebted to this idea of repression, kind of the return of the repressed in manifested in reality. And we've always had those feelings of something, walking into a room, or waking up from a dream, or seeing an object that has a strange familiarity to it that is both terrifying and intellectually disorienting. And this idea of "un" as a prefix, this in-betweenness, is kind of something that I feel painting, it exists in this in-between space, that is fascinating, especially in relation to theory. Now I want to go back to this idea of theory, and it really comes from, I was in New York, as I was saying, and I'd been reading these on the plane. I'd finished Thinking Through Painting, and then I was reading this one afterwards, Canvases and Careers Today. And I was in this bookstore in New York, and Strand Books, one of the best bookstores in the world, no doubt. And upstairs there's a really small section. I always visit this bookstore when I'm in New York, but this section's got smaller and smaller. It's art criticism and theory. And I was looking through the volumes, really, really good books there. And this popped up, another Sternberg Press publication, which I'd never come across before. It was published in 2013 or thereabouts. French Theory and American Art, and it's been perfect. I've been reading it for the last week. And it has writers like Sylvain Lothringer, whom I interviewed with Michaela Cutia when we were co-editors of the publication, that we were funded through the Arts Council Project Award in 2011 or so. And we produced 5 issues of this publication. It was A3 size publication. I don't know if I have any copies here. They're somewhere up there. And it was very much, we were commissioning writers, Irish writers mainly, and an artist who would create a centerfold, and they would inhabit the front cover as well, the artist. But the artist we were commissioning to write essays around the condition of art making today, especially around the global financial crisis. We had launches in Dublin, in Derry, in Galway, and it was a brilliant time. Especially, we were very much invested in theory, and I want to get across this definition of theory that may be misread. Like theory, when I was in art school, theory was something that was quite offensive, really, that we had to read theory to be artists. And there was this kind of defensive position around theory. But looking back at it, theory was something that really helped me out as an artist. And it helped me think through painting. It may have even got me to stop painting, because I knew the conditions of painting at that time were not sustainable in the way I needed them to be. I was interested in other things, and painting wasn't doing the thing that I wanted it to do. Even though I still loved it, I didn't find that it was the right tool. So theory is something, and it's something I wrote down a note of. Silver Lottringer talks about this, and he produced through semiotext. I didn't mention this either. Silver Lottringer, he would have always defined himself as a theorist, not a philosopher, even though when I was in the presence of him, interviewing him, I felt I was in the presence of a philosopher, a brilliant philosopher. We interviewed him at 126 Gallery in Galway, and Catherine Waugh, who's a Delusian, and she lives in Galway, but I think she's living in West Cork now. She had made this film, The Art of Time, which I had seen in Mermaid Art Centre as part of another project called Unbuilding Project. And it was just so influential to me. She became really influential to me. She introduced me to Deleuze, whom I'd never read before. And it was just a whole new world. And in that film, she interviews Silver Lottringer. She also interviews John Reichman, who is in this volume also. And I just was spellbound by all this information. So theory is not philosophy. Theory is something that is very present in the environment in which it is used as a tool. In this publication, they talk about theory relieving the artist or releasing the artist from art history. That, when you go to art school and you're making work, and then one of the lecturers comes up to you, oh, you should have a look at this person. And you go up to the library, and there they are, and they're doing this basically the same thing you are doing. So artists are always caught up in with the baggage of art history, especially painters. And what theory did was release us from this baggage and allowed us to look at the present and start to think through the medium. And as part of this series of publications that Silver Lottringer edited and formalized, it was called Foreign Agents. I have some of the publications here. And so the way he described this series with semiotext was, they would read like intense doses of pure theory and could be inhaled line by line. So there's something about theory in the eyes of Silver Lottringer, Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari, who and they're a really good example, that relationship between the two of them, because Deleuze is a systematic philosopher. He's indebted to history all the way back to Plato and Aristotle or whatever, and there's a kind of system around his philosophy, and it connects back. Same with Jacques Derrida, but Jacques Derrida is part of this as well. He's a disruptor in terms of his deconstruction. So these philosophers coming out of structuralism into post-structuralism, this is where theory emerges, in between. It has an unness to it, that prefix again. And it's something that isn't pedantic, it isn't dependent on history, although history is in it. It's not there with its footnotes and endnotes. It's not referential, it's vitalistic. And its theory is something that exists within painting. It's like Jacques Rancière in his paper, that which I bring up in some of my recent subtexts. He wrote this paper in his publication, The Future of the Image, and it's called Painting in the Text. And this is what text is always there, theory is always there. It's just extracting out, extrapolating it out, or extruding it out and seeing it there and seeing what it does. So that idea of they will be read like intense doses of pure theory, and could be inhaled line by line. So this book has been like just serendipitous that this has turned up. It's been more helpful than I ever thought it could be. And there's something in the inside, like these Sternberg Press publications are beautiful. And in the inside, on the inside cover, you get this image here speaking about Gilles Deleuze, and it's of Gilles Deleuze on a beach in California, Big Sur, in 1975, and it's taken by Jean-Jacques Lebel, and I just found it beautiful. And actually, in the inside information, it only says it's by Jean-Jacques Lebel, 1975. And then there's details of it in the pages that divide each of the papers. There's only these little details of the rocks and stuff that kind of I don't know, it kind of breaks it down even further, the image, removes it of colour. Kind of beautiful there. But I did a screen print of it, and it's the first time I've tried this method. It took me all day yesterday to do it. It was quite beautiful. It's a CYMK screen print. Takes 4 layers. This took 3 layers because I didn't use black, because I felt the black dulled out everything. And it's a method that I want to use towards the proposed zine that will accompany this project, unMade painting project, that will take place at Green and Red in October. And the whole idea, this has been an ongoing conversation with myself and Damien, but I want to create a publication around painting that deals with this idea of theory. Initially, I was going to call the zine Painting, in Theory. And it was a kind of play of words in terms of how we experience painting today, of course, as a digital image, and how that digital image has become even more seductive. Yet, we lose the thing itself. And that's something I'm interested in. It's that Baudrillard idea of the simulation, the simulacrum, but also how painting has lost a kind of reflexivity. Painters are just producing to disseminate, but there's nothing else going on. I made this today. Oh, this is a work in progress. What do you think it is? Blah, blah, blah. There's nothing left. It's just a kind of reactive reception. There's no thinking through anymore. And I'm wondering now today, does theory matter? It did matter in my art school days. It really helped me as an artist to think through the purposes of why I'm doing the things I'm doing as an artist. It gave me energy, vitality. I wasn't so much caught up in the political moment, but I think that was in the work anyway. It's like the text is already in the work. It wasn't explicit or intentional what I was doing, but you could find the current moment in the work. It just wasn't illustrating that politically, socially, whatever. So I'm wondering about how theory as a kind of unness, that UN, that prefix, that unconsciousness of theory, that it isn't explicit but it's there. It's something inhaled line by line, but not referenced back to some kind of pedantic process of endnoting or footnoting the references and putting them back in place of history, losing their vitality and just archiving them. I'm wondering, can theory emerge again on the surface or even under the surface of painting? Can discourse emerge again? I'm looking, like, I've been seduced again by rereading these publications. Like, I just think about these publications here, which I read in, I don't know, 2009, 2010, and they were really important. There was such a really interesting group of writers talking about painting, especially this one here. Like, here you have George Baker, Joanna Burton, Merlin Carpenter, Melanie Gilligan, Isabel Graw, Tom Hollart, Brandon W. Joseph. He actually did a publication there recently as an editor for the Brooklyn Museum called Copy Machines Manifestos, Artists Who Make Zines. And we have John Kelsey, Andre Rothman, Julia Voss. Absolutely brilliant, and also Isabel Graw, of course. She always is at the back of these as a fulcrum of that discourse around, and that theory around painting's relationship to the market. Sternberg has created a whole economy around that, and I think it's something that is missing from the reflexivity and the production of painters today. Now, they're just making stuff, but there's nothing behind it. There's nothing, or there is things behind it, but they're not being talked about in rich and complex ways, which I think they can be. So that's where we're at in this. Next week, there will be an online assembly, and I've put out a few posts on Substack. I'm not on Instagram anymore. If anyone's trying to contact me through that, I'm not there, even though my profile is there. That's been really a relief. I'm working in a different way now than I would have if I was still on there. That's something to think about for everyone, I think, all artists. But I am also missing that, the patterns, the psychologies, all that kind of stuff that plays out in those things is very, very telling. But next week we'll meet for this online assembly, and we'll, like, really it's an opportunity to just figure out, gather ideas, and see what could come out of this. It's not really, I'm saying this in a way, like, I'm thinking more broadly about all of this, and what is possible through the resurrection of theory outside of art education, on the ground, in the studios. When I was in New York with my family, we took this kind of a detour over this. It's called the High Line, and it goes. It kind of leads you all the way down to Chelsea, where the galleries are, but also the printed matter, the Whitney Biennial, all the spaces. So it cuts through the gridded New York landscape, and it's on a bridge basically. And you walk through. There's lots of plants and stuff like that, but it's cutting it. It's going against the grain of the grid, and there was one. It's coming down to dusk, and I looked over and I saw an artist studio, and you could look in, and there was a painter there. And it was really interesting because they were standing there in front of these large paintings, and there was all this road traffic underneath. There was all this high line traffic of people walking, not really taking notice. Most people on their phones. And I looked across and stopped, and my wife said to him, "God, it's amazing just seeing an artist there in front of their canvas, working as everything else is moving by." And there was something interesting in that observation because it's such a strange activity, painting, or being an artist in general, being in these studios making work. And my fantasy about this artist is not that they have an end game or an end product. My fantasy about this painter is that they're always on making their painting, that they're not represented by a gallery, that they're not creating a product or a craft for some kind of purpose, that they're thinking through their work all the time, that theory is there, intrinsic to that process, and that they're on making the painting over and over again. And that's where the vitality comes from, and that's where the theory comes from. Now, maybe they are an artist that is making work for the conveyor belt of the art market, but my fantasy is that, and more broadly speaking, for all painters and artists, is that they're just making work. They're thinking through as the rest of the world passes by, and at this accelerated pace. So, yeah, the whole idea of this project is to start to question the conditions of painting, its circulation, its dissemination, and where theory can exist or can it anymore. Like, I know when I was in art school, like, theory was something that was forced upon us. And sometimes, and most of the time, artists were defensive against it, but it was there, it existed in the process. I think those artists that embraced it a little bit at least started to function better, especially when they left art school. They were way more reflexive of what they were doing, the conditions of their making, those in power, and that helped them to sustain a practice. It has helped me to sustain this practice and to change it and become reflexive of what I'm doing and for what reasons I'm doing. That's why small projects is here, in that I started this out to get independence away from commercial printers, graphic designers, to work in small batches, work with artists, collaborate with them, give them a place, to facilitate a place that they could make work, think through, and that I've really found the zine, the artist publication, as an alternative to the gallery, to the white cube, to the art institution. It can almost resist that, but it also has to work with the institution, and there is a space for that. There's a kind of meta critique always going on in institutional critique. So, yeah, that's where we're at, unMade painting. So if you can attend, please do. It's next Monday, which I've only realized is Easter Monday. But we're going to go ahead anyway. It's from 6 to half 7. Bring your thoughts. Hopefully this helps as a starting point, but it is only a starting point. There's no certainties in this. The only certainties are there will be an exhibition happening at Green and Red Gallery in October. There will be a concrete space where something will be produced that will be screen printed, but there won't be manifestos, but they will be ways of questioning what is happening, what is next. We'll also probably have public discussions around this. Witnessing the Whitney Biennial was interesting because it was a very heady, intellectually challenging show. And it was interesting that American artist Joshua Citarella, who hosts Doom Scroll on YouTube and elsewhere, he was part of it. And he's been kind of interesting in relation to theory and thinking through whether through Marxism or other kind of systems, especially in relation to the art world and the market in the art world and the survival of the artist, the economic or the bioeconomic, as Andrea Rothman says in this, the bioeconomic survival of the artist. This has been a question for the last, anyway, on my watch. So it's interesting he's there as someone bringing theory back into the landscape of the art world. And there's lots more, especially in America. So there is a resurgence I'm kind of witnessing at the moment. And so it's really, this whole project is about just asking, what next? Or can we use theory in the way, artists in America used it between the 60s and the 80s to create a kind of vitality around work, or just an alternative to the commodification and dissemination as a digital image. It can be more than that, I think. But anyway, that's it. Next week, just send me an email if you're interested and I can jot down your name. I'll put up a link at some point in the next week. My email is smallnightzine@gmail.com. Hopefully that brought some clarity. I don't know what I say on these things because they're not scripted at all. But definitely I would recommend these books, these two in particular. I have another one by Painting Beyond Itself by Joslet, which I didn't find as good, even though he's brought up in this idea of painting beside itself is repeated over and over again. But it does go towards what we're thinking about in relation to painting and its manifestation in this project. Okay, I'm going to leave that there. Thanks for listening, and hopefully I'll see you next Monday.